My name is Patricia Kathleen, and this podcast series will contain interviews I conduct with women, female-identified, and non-binary individuals regarding their professional stories and personal narrative as it relates to their perspective. This podcast is designed to hold a space for all individuals to learn from their counterparts, regardless of age, status, or industry. We intend to transparently investigate the evolving global dialogue regarding underrepresented figures in all industries across the USA and abroad. By hosting these stories and conversations, we aim to contribute to the changing platform and representation of these individuals for the future. Now let's start the conversation. Hi everyone, welcome back. I am your host, Patricia, and today I'm sitting down with Katina Mountanos. She is the founder of On Adulting, which is a viral blog and community of over 23,000 millennials. You can find it online at www.onadulting.com. Welcome, Katina.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'm excited to climb through. I love what you're doing. I love the ethos of your company and kind of the respite that it offers your community. And I cannot wait to climb through all of that with you, in addition to kind of new endeavors that you're doing on Daydreamers Space and things like that. But before we do that, I will read a bio on Katina for everyone listening. However, a quick roadmap and trajectory of today's podcast, it'll follow the same roadmap as all of these in this series. Namely, we will look at the academic background and early professional life of Katina, and then we'll turn our efforts towards unpacking her current endeavors that we just brought up on adulting.com, Daydreamer Space, her book, and some podcasting that she's doing. And we'll climb through like the nuts and bolts of the when they were launched, all of the who, what, when, where, co-founders, funding, all that stuff. And then we'll get into the ethos and the philosophy of why it was built and all of those things. And then we'll turn our attention towards the goals that Katina has for over the next 3 years between all of her different endeavors regarding the conversation that how that's changed with the current, climate of the COVID pandemic, as well as scaling and expansion and branding and how all of those narratives kind of change given the current climate. And then we'll wrap everything up with advice that Katina may have for those of you who are looking to get involved in her current endeavors or perhaps emulate some of her success. A quick bio on Katina before we start peppering her with questions. Katina Mountanos is the founder of On Adulting, a viral blog and community of over 23,000 millennials who are figuring out how to navigate adulthood in a conscious, happy way. She is an entrepreneur, writer, and mindset coach whose work has been featured on HuffPost, Fast Company, Teen Vogue, Elite Daily, Mindbodygreen, and others. Katina started her career in data analytics at Goldman Sachs and most recently co-founded a brand new startup called Daydreamers to help everyday adults access creativity more often. Her first book, On Adulting, will be hitting the shelves in fall 2020, following along at On Adulting, or join the private OA Facebook group at this space. And I'll let her kind of drop into more of those so that you guys can find her communities and tap into her across all of her social platforms. But Katina, before we drop into your companies and things like that, I'm hoping you can kind of give us the brief story and background of your academic and professional history so that we know kind of where you came from and what you garnered up until this point.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that background. So I started off my career, I guess, in college. I went to NYU business school as an undergrad. So I grew up in a family of small business owners. They were immigrants from Greece, and they started off in the restaurant industry. So when I kind of aspired to my career, I imagined I would be doing something similar. I always kind of grew up working in my parents' restaurants. So when I got to Stern, I was kind of taken aback by this obsession really with going into the finance world. It was something that I never knew about. I didn't know what investment banking was. I didn't know why everyone was wearing suits all the time. But even though I knew at the time that wasn't necessarily my true passion or my path, I didn't really see any other paths ahead of me in school. So I kind of did what any high achieving kid would do and continued to push myself to be in the quote unquote most successful and best classes, and do what probably most of your listeners have done. So I decided to major in finance and ended up being recruited by Goldman Sachs to work for them as an internship as a junior, and then work for them after school. So I kind of signed my offer senior year, ready to head into the adult world, and ended up realizing that I could graduate a semester early. And since I was taking out some loans to be in school and was on scholarship, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this. This is an opportunity for me to not necessarily accrue any more money to be here. And instead of actually starting my job like most people who graduated early did, I decided to actually backpack through Australia and New Zealand by myself for 4 months. And I always look back to that period in time in my life as this hugely instrumental moment, essentially, where I really started understanding who I was and asking myself these big questions, and actually seeing firsthand that people could be happy and fulfilled and connected outside of this typical path. So when I arrived back in school, or back kind of to graduation after my travels, I kind of approached my adult career in a very different light, and ended up going to work at Goldman, but obviously went into it with a mindset that was quite different than I would have if I didn't spend time kind of getting to know myself in those early days.
Yeah, it sounds like your travels might have formed some of the core tenets of your current endeavors. So that's
Yes.
cool. And that's always true, right? Like there's very few human experiences where you can't relate it to something, even if it isn't a conscious thought that you've experienced with. I'm curious, how long did you stay at Goldman?
I was there for a year and a half, maybe a little bit more.
And did you
So
go straight from there into launching On Adulting?
No, well, I guess it's a little complicated. When I first graduated and started working, I started writing a book that I was essentially this compilation of my experiences and reflections and why adulthood felt so difficult and so different than what I had imagined it to be. And I had sent it out to my friends and family, and they were like, "This is cool, but very weird. You should stick to your job." And I kind of put it off on the back burner for a little while, and then realized that I was, deeply passionate about making impact in the world, and that wasn't necessarily happening in my day-to-day at work. So I started to raise my hand, as they called it in the corporate world, for other projects and opportunities that were coming up. So I actually helped create our first environmental sustainability team at Goldman, and really started diving into what social impact meant within a large organization. And then from there, ended up getting another role at a philanthropic venture fund in New York, and really kind of dove into what impact means in an organizational sense. And when I did that, I started writing On Adulting at the same time as a blog and just a passion project.
Yeah, well, it sounds like those core tenets there again, considering how, from what I now have learned what On Adulting is and what the work that you do there, it kind of plays into considering society and systems from these other standpoints, like these other side endeavors from the raising the hand moment that you are saying you experienced. So let's turn towards onadultingnow.com. Let's first get into like some of the cyber brick and mortar of it. So when was it founded? Was it you alone? Did you have co-founders, and did you take funding?
Yeah, so On Adulting truly started as, I guess, what we would call a side hustle. So it really started as just a simple blog. I was writing on Medium, and essentially, realized that other people were relating to my words, so decided to take it into its own kind of website and, it's interesting because I apply strategy to so much of my work. That's what I'm often hired to do. But when it comes to a lot of my own passion projects, I wouldn't say I necessarily acted strategically in any sense of the word. So I kept kind of just tuning into what felt right. So after a couple of months, I kind of took it on to its own platform and was still working my full-time job, but was continuing to pitch and get asked to write for a lot of these big publications. And I actually didn't use social media at all for the first year of writing. It was not something that felt connected to me. But when I realized that so many people were resonating with this message, I decided to take or reach people where they were. And from there, after kind of growing a social media presence, after a couple of months, I was able to take it full time. So
Nice.
It was a much more windy journey than.
So when you launched it, it's interesting. I don't hear a lot of millennials talk about, not using social media in the very impetus, in the very beginning of the birth of their endeavors. And it's interesting that you severed it away. How long did it take when you reintroduced it to social media for you to hit the boost that you really were looking for to take it into full time?
It really only took a couple of months. It's really interesting because I think a lot of times what I had seen was a lot of my peers were starting these social media accounts out of this goal to make it rich quick, right? They were like, this is a really great career where I could basically do nothing and make money, sharing my life. And that was definitely not what I wanted to do. I had this amazing job that I really loved going into every day. It was challenging me mentally, and this was my passion essentially. So because of that, I was so deeply connected to the message that I was like, I don't care. I don't need to be on this platform that I don't even use myself. And then when I took a step back and realized that the people that I was reaching and wanted to reach were living on social media, right? They were consuming this content that wasn't necessarily filling them up. And since I had spent about a year really honing my voice and my message off of the platform, when I got on it, I was so clear on what my mission was and what my voice was and what I was bringing to the table that it was really seamless for me to kind of build a community there, which might sound, not real, but that's kind of how it worked out in the first stages.
Absolutely. So let's unpack a little bit of the services or what you provide when someone hits for our audience. If you go to onadulting.com, what's the first thing you're going to encounter? How is it all set up? And what kind of services do you provide from there? What is the information? And also, what is the company about?
Yeah. So, first and foremost, the mission of On Adulting is to help millennials and adults truly live happier, more conscious lives. So the purpose of it is to provide a lot of resources in order to do so. And the way that I do that is through writing, through downloadables, through my social media platform. And that's where you could kind of take, if you go to the On Adulting website, you could take any journey that you wish, right? That's completely free. The second aspect of it is community. I think that the part that's really difficult about growing up is that you often feel really alone when you're starting to realize and kind of grow into who you are and ask these big questions. So before COVID-19, there were a couple of different in-person types of workshops, and I would often partner with brands that really align with the On Adulting mission to host these in person, and then even just kind of regular meetups with the On Adulting community in different cities. And then lastly, I provide, and this is a newer offering. On Adulting didn't start this way because it wasn't necessarily a business before, but I do provide coaching and consulting, which is something that I had been asked about quite often and didn't necessarily offer or feel like I had the space to offer until the past year and a half. So I now offer one-on-one coaching. I've done group coaching and then kind of one-off workshop-esque types of coaching. And that's been a really amazing journey for me because I truly love connecting with people and kind of seeing them grow in their own journey. And yeah, it's been something that, as you said before, you love podcasting and can do it forever. I feel like no matter what happens, I will always have a few coaching clients that are truly like my mentees,
Yeah.
that I kind of help along their own journey.
So are the people that you're training into doing what you do, or are you training techniques that they implement in their life? So is it like a life coaching, or are you training them into kind of implementing the onadulting.com axioms?
Yeah, so it's completely personal. I guess there's two different aspects of it. First is almost the like overarching big life question. So if you're completely confused, have no idea like what you want to do as a career, what you feel passionate about, these small everyday life decisions are really hard. That's one aspect. And then the other one is more kind of business and brand coaching. So if you want to build a company that feels really connected to your life mission, don't know how to do it, don't know how to get it out into the world and still feel like you're staying authentic and true to yourself, that's another kind of part of what we might work on. So yeah, it's a lot of conscious thinking at the root of it.
Do you find that your clients are in a specific industry or fit a specific profile, or they just kind of span across all industries and profiles?
I think that the root of it, people who I work with are connected to making some type of difference in the world. So it might not be that they're like starting a nonprofit per se, but they are, passionate about helping others in some way. Whether that might be through creating content like podcasting, or maybe starting a startup in Silicon Valley, which is where I recently just moved back to New York from. So it kind of runs the gamut, but I would say that's a profile. And then typically it skews women who are in their 20s and 30s and maybe even 40s, though there are a few men in there who kind of end up feeling connected to the mission.
Yeah, fantastic. I like that. So
Yeah.
given, before we move into the Daydreamer space, which is your newest endeavor, I want to look at like the growth thus far. So on adulting, it sounds like you have kind of a soft launch because it went in and then it took a couple of months before it was your full-time endeavor. When do you acknowledge as it kind of the year that onadulting.com launched? And what is the growth, would you say, been like since then?
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, now having gone through, which we'll get into, launching a funded startup, it was completely different. Like, this was, as I've said, a kind of a passion project where I was starting to really just share my own thoughts, and grew into something that I was able to have as a career. Something that I didn't mention was truly my goal of starting a blog in the first place was to write a book. That was one of my kind of biggest life goals, and I knew I was called to that, but working in finance, I had no clue how that would start. So I just started really sharing my musings on life in that way, and it really took on its own life of its own, right? So I would say around 2016 is when I started writing, and then and mid 2017 is when I took it full time, and winter of 2017 was when I launched the social media aspect of it.
And that's
so
when it took on a life of its own.
yeah, exactly. I would say the exponential growth really kind of started there. So yeah, it wasn't necessarily these like big planned launches, like a company per se that's going to be, creating product and things like that. This is something that's more like close to my heart, and something that
Yeah.
is truly about creating community and connection.
Did you always know that you were going to go for a partnership, and did you look for sponsorship? How did you make this fiscally viable for you in the beginning as opposed to now? I mean, usually way leads on to way, but there's the initial kind of door opening to those financial endeavors.
Totally. So since I was working in a pretty lucrative job while I was doing on adulting and staying up late and writing, I didn't think about finances from it at all. And then my now fiance got a great role out in Silicon Valley. He was working in private equity at the time, and we both decided to move out there together. And because of that personal life move, I kind of had this big decision to make where I could start recruiting for jobs that I didn't necessarily want, or look at the financial viability of unadulting. And at the time, I had already been contacted by aligned brands to do partnerships, whether it was, as I said, hosting events or posting on social media, or kind of even doing some strategic consulting for them. So I already had some aspect of that going. And then when I moved out to the West Coast, I realized that I could apply that strategy mindset that I was helping my clients with at work every day turn into my own business. So
Nice.
That's kind of how it happened.
Okay. Yeah. So let's look quickly at your book. Is it called On Adulting?
Yeah, so we're still working on the final title, but
that's the working title.
Called, On Adulting.
Nice. Can you give us an overview? I know that, authors, I come from a family of writers and playwrights, and I've met, nuclear physicists that are less jittery than an author with a book about to launch. But aside from that, can you give us like an overview, or like, a goodnight kiss to like what it's about, or anything like that? Just a brief synopsis.
Totally. So I'm really excited. It's essentially bringing On Adulting, the brand and resource, to life in a longer form book. And essentially there are 4 parts. The first part is really creating a foundation with the reader about, what we're all experiencing when we enter adulthood, what parts are difficult and hard, what parts are confusing and weird. So part 1 is really just kind of getting on the same page as each other. Part 2 is my favorite. It's a lot of research on why we became the way that we are, especially for the millennial and Gen Z generations, and really looking into a lot of societal and cultural research around what trends or decisions or even kind of economic shifts have driven us to be raised, collectively in the way that we are, and how we got to be making decisions that we do. So that's part 2. And then part 3 and 4 are somewhat similar, but they're a lot more kind of instructional and reflective. And they're all about these big kind of life strategic shifts that you could start to think about, reflect on, and incorporate to start living the life that you choose instead of one that's a negotiation. And then the last part is more just about sustainable ways that you could start to make changes right now, instead of kind of waiting for this big sign to show up at your doorstep.
Yeah. And well, I like what you're doing, the business, and then the book. It sounds like it addresses a narrative, and you're kind of acknowledging a lot of things, I imagine, terms and things like that. I'm wondering, how much do you identify with the labels and titles and stereotypes, both good and bad, that have been assigned to millennials? Like, does your book address like, here's the stereotype, here's the belief, here's this, and here's possibly how it or why it is? Or do you dispel some of them? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I think that's truly what the second part is all about. I mean, I think that stereotypes are always in place for some reason, right? There is some truth to them. But I think that there's a lot of misconception around millennials as a generation, because we, and I definitely relate to a lot of these experiences. And really what drove me to kind of start to reflect on them is that I think we are making a lot of change in systems that have existed in a certain way for a long time. And I think every generation does that, right? But there are certain reasons why we are approaching these systems with a mindset of kind of inclusivity, but also potentially perceived as whatever bad negative stereotype you might bring up, like laziness, entitlement, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's all for the better.
Yeah. Do you ever address in any of your, or are you planning to in the future, the subsequent generations that have come up after you, and some of the differences, like, Gen Z, and depends on what the I generation or whatever they're going to be labeled to as next. People are now calling it the Corona
Yeah.
generation. I was like, don't do that. Don't call them that. That's awful. Just call them the I generation. Like, do something else. But at very least, we know we have Gen Z. Do you ever have like a dialogue between like subsequent, because you have all of this very reflective,
Yeah.
conversation and rhetoric between yourself and your perceptions as to what life is, and for you and your peers, but is that ever going to extend to the coming up after you generation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I personally, at this point, haven't necessarily done a ton of work on comparison between us and Gen Z, us meaning millennials. But in the book, I do talk a little bit about some ways that we're similar, and some kind of big life shifts that will be guiding all of us after the millennial generation.
Nice.
But it's a great point. I'm very interested in kind of big cultural changes that impact how we view the world. So
I am too. And one of the things I
yeah,
adore most about the millennial generation, there's a billion, I think, in every generation, there's wonderful
yeah,
things, but the inclusivity, into the theories driven, and some of the lifestyle mannerisms and things like that. I think there's always a tone of inclusivity and consideration about ramifications and things of that
yeah,
nature that I hope include, the next generation coming up. I think that we needed more of that mindset in previous generations, this idea that we are all here, we're all involved in this together.
yeah,
Well, that's exciting. Everyone, it's supposed to be launching in the fall, so keep your eye out for it. If the working title is on adulting, it's going to be something around that, but people should research it. At very least, your name as an author, it's going to pull up. But that'll be exciting when it drops. We will definitely shout it on our social.
yeah.
And
Thank
now
you.
I want to turn really quickly. We're running out of time, but I want to turn the attention over to Daydreamer Space. And I have to say, I got on, and as part of my research, I looked at
Yeah,
the Vimeo clip that you and your co-founder, I'm not sure who it is with you, and it was really cool. It was very fun. It reminded me of a Y Combinator pitch like video. I've been privy to
yeah,
help like judge some of those in the past, and so
yeah,
I like the authenticity. I thought it was really cool. So that on the outset, from one filmmaker
yeah,
to another. But I also the concept at first I was like, this is kind of darling. But as I started to ruminate with it, I was like, actually, it's kind of necessary. This is really kind of cool. And I think a lot of people could just
yeah,
approach it as like, yeah, it's like a mental playground for
yeah.
adults. But I hope that you can just unpack it really briefly for everyone listening, and talk about like some of the core tenets. I know you're in the infancy stage with it, but if you can kind of unpack it really quickly for people, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, totally. So Daydreamers is my new company that I co-founded actually with my fiance. So we kind of the synopsis of it quickly is that we are truly about redefining how we all spend our free time and making it cool to have hobbies again. So really tapping into that creativity that we had as kids that we, thought about so often, but oftentimes takes a nosedive as we enter adulthood. And the reason that we came up with it is because Dupi, my co-founder, and I often found ourselves after our intense days at work sitting on our couch and finding ourselves scrolling through our phone, watching Netflix, doing the
Yeah.
same thing every single night and feeling really drained, and realized that we had made it. We had these great jobs that we loved. We, were lucky enough to live in spaces that we loved, but we were like, is this it? Is this
Right.
all, we do? And when we started to do research about how we spend our free time, we realized that over 80% of people look at their phones within 5 minutes of waking up. And it's not just that technology is the enemy, but it's really that we can create these habits throughout our day that actually help us feel good, because the research says that so many of us are becoming disconnected, tired, sick, and lonely. So we kind of were creating the antithesis of that. And our original purpose, as we were kind of fundraising and creating our strategy, was to create physical locations for people to be creative just as you would a gym. So there would be a bunch of different creative mediums. Anyone, no matter if you picked up a paintbrush when you were 5 or you kind of tap into it every day, could come connect with others and also continue to learn and experiment and grow.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, since we launched right before the coronavirus, a couple of weeks before, we've shifted our strategy quite a bit, but we are really deeply passionate and connected to our mission of helping people live longer and happier lives through being more creative in their everyday.
Yeah. And I mean, every time, there's a pivot to having a virtual experience to a company, I don't think it always benefits, but I definitely think that one of those key benefits is pushing something past a limitation that wouldn't have normally been looked at, and so moving that effort into what it looks like virtually or anything else is also very inclusive. You can include people in Greece, that wouldn't normally be hanging out in your spaces and things like that. So I think it's a cool aspect. And I really do I agree with what you have said. And so does obviously all the scientific literature, but people are becoming ill and they're making themselves more ill by not having some type of a release other than, something unhealthy like alcohol, to this concept that everyone needs. I think the only thing that's really accepted right now is that people agree that you should try to eat healthy and go to the gym. But I think that art and this is coming from an art historian, but has been left out of the conversation for so long. People forget what it does to the brain and the amount of, creativity and movement. And when I say art, I mean everything. So everything that your endeavor is involving, but I agree. And I think it will become the next, I truly believe, as we start to analyze from the pandemic and things like that, what we need for health in our lives, this moment for creativity and stretching parts of the brain that you hadn't gotten into and putting the cell phone down and doing all of that will become crucial. So Daydreamers has a website up right now, right? What is it?
Yes, it's daydreamerspace.com.
Cool. And I did hit it and it is explanative. I like you've got a great tone with really like your succinct explanation as to what it's meant to do. And I think people should hit it just to kind of really bring it into, like I said, I sat and marinated kind of with the concept of it and was like, no, actually I really subscribe to this. At first I thought it was cute and interesting. And then I was like, wait a second. So I think that people should hit it and have that dialogue and then reach out to you and start that dialogue furthering. I think it's a good idea. I want to wrap up with asking you, I know that it's changed for everyone and continues to change on a daily basis. However, I wanted to ask you what you think some of the changes, or not even the changes, but the goals that you have for the next 1 to 3 years regarding both of your endeavors on adulting and Daydreamer Space, and whether or not those have changed dialogue, but if you do 1 to 3 year goals, I imagine coming from finance, you'd have something like that going on in your own life. But what are they on the horizon for you right now?
Yeah, so I actually just shared publicly that I just accepted a master's program at Columbia with a focus on, it's a clinical psychology program with a focus on mind-body connection. So I'm really excited to be starting that in the fall. And I think for me, that is really just evolving all of the conversations that I've been having for the past couple of years. Obviously finance and business is so important to me as kind of a foundation, but I've been really interested in diving more into the science and research behind why we are the way we are, and how we could continue to be our best selves. So that's a huge goal for me that's becoming realized and will kind of take place over the next 2 years, regardless of if it's virtual or not. And I hope that through that, I'm able to continue to kind of be able to speak on these topics in a relatable way, but also with the background and knowledge that I'll gain through this program and through a lot of the experiences that I'll have. So that's a huge goal for me, and hopefully writing more books. I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
I mean, book writers need to love it, and you do. So
Yeah.
it sounds
Yeah.
fantastic. Well, that's a great goal, and it's an awesome department. It sounds like it's going to accompany all of your past endeavors beautifully.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you ran into somebody who is just getting ready. They said they've got this personal site going, and they're not doing it to become some type of a lifestyle influencer or anything else. And she was just getting started. It was a young female or female identified non-binary individual, and they came up to you and said, "Listen, got all this experience. I'm doing a career I love, but it's on a completely different subject, and I'm starting these things out." What are the top 3 pieces of advice you would give her, knowing what you know now from before you started on adulting?
That's a great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is this idea of getting connected to your North Star, is what I call it, but obviously there are many other ways that you could describe it, your personal mission statement, your passion, whatever it is. I find it really helpful, that logical side of my brain, knowing that I have a sentence that is really guiding me on every decision that I make. So for me, it comes back to almost that exact purpose of On Adulting, but it's helping millennials navigate adulthood in a conscious, happy, and healthy way. So every decision that I make in my life, and I would imagine this human being could apply to their own lives, is to really tap into and understand what that North Star is, and then use it as a barometer if you're going in a direction that feels good or not. So I think that's the number 1 piece of advice. I think number 2, which some people might think is silly, but I think have fun. It's so easy to forget, and to me, the most impactful decisions that I've made always came from a place when I was feeling light and free and fun. So I think as millennials and Gen Z, we have been trained to collect trophies and keep climbing these ladders, but that's a really important piece of advice. The third piece of advice, I think there's something to be said about continuing to be curious with yourself and really set aside time, whether it's every day or every week or every month, to just get curious about the decisions that you're making. I think a lot of times, at least what I experienced when I was younger, was getting really frustrated at myself for judging myself for doing something because it felt like I should in the moment, and those shoulds started to pile on, and that's really what was difficult for me. But when I started approaching it with a curious mind instead, I found that I got so much more information out of it and was able to really drive home a connected or decision that helped me hopefully impact as many people as possible. So
nice. Yeah. I like that. So I've got getting connected with your North Star, have fun, and stay curious about you. Those are cool. I really like those. I hope they're addressed in your book, because those are fantastic. I feel like those are each chapters unto themselves. Yes. So I'm hoping that we get more on that. Well, we are all out of time, Katina, but I want to say thank you so much for taking the moment today to share your information and all of your stuff. And congratulations on your new program, and best of luck.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. For everyone who's been listening, we've been talking to Katina Mountanos. You can contact her or look at all of the endeavors we've been talking about on www.onadulting.com, as well as www.daydreamerspace.com. Thank you for listening, for everyone out there. And until we talk again next time, remember to always bet on yourself. Slancha.